In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where every shadow could hide death and every sound might be your last, Navy SEALs have learned to trust their training, their weapons, and each other. They've faced insurgents, Taliban fighters, and foreign operatives. But nothing in their extensive combat experience prepared them for what emerged from the tall grass that day in 2019. When thermal scopes detected enemy movement at 1,500 meters, it should have been another routine engagement. The SEALs had the high ground, superior firepower, and the element of surprise. What they didn't expect was for a lone figure to rise from the vegetation, not armed with an AK-47 or RPG, but with nothing more than her bare hands, and a story that would shake the foundation of everything they thought they knew about their mission. This is the true account of Operation Silent Guardian, classified for nearly 5 years, and the woman whose appearance changed the course of not just one mission, but the entire understanding of what was really happening in the remote valleys of the Hindu Kush Mountains. The helicopter blades cut through the thin mountain air as SEAL Team 6 descended toward the landing zone. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez checked his gear one final time, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency across his tactical vest. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was coordinating attacks from a compound deep in the Kunar province. What made this operation different was the location, a valley that had been eerily quiet for months, despite being a known smuggling route. Rodriguez glanced at his teammates. Petty Officer Jake Morrison was studying satellite images on his tablet, his blue eyes tracking potential escape routes. Corpsman Luis Santos was organizing medical supplies, his movements methodical despite the turbulence. The team leader, Lieutenant Commander David Chun, spoke quietly into his radio, confirming final details with base command. These men had operated together for 3 years, completing over 40 missions without losing a single teammate. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris. Within seconds, the 6-man team was moving across the rocky terrain, their night vision goggles painting the landscape in green and black. The silence was immediately noticeable. In most areas of Afghanistan, there were always sounds, distant generators, animals, the faint hum of activity. Here, the only noise was the wind whistling through the rocks, and their own controlled breathing. Chun raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. Through his scope, he could see the target compound roughly 2 miles ahead. Intelligence reports indicated 12 to 15 enemy combatants, armed with standard Taliban weaponry. The plan was simple: establish overwatch positions, confirm the presence of the high-value target, and either capture or eliminate based on the situation. As they approached their designated positions, Morrison noticed something unusual. The grass in the valley below was taller than expected, swaying in patterns that seemed inconsistent with the wind direction. He mentioned it to Rodriguez, who dismissed it as a minor environmental detail. They had bigger concerns. The team spent the next 4 hours moving into position. Their overwatch point was a rocky outcrop that provided excellent visibility of the compound and surrounding area. As dawn approached, thermal imaging began detecting movement in the buildings below. Santos counted at least 10 distinct heat signatures, confirming the intelligence estimates. What troubled Chun was the complete absence of perimeter security. Most Taliban compounds, especially those housing important figures, maintained guards around the clock. The thermal scopes showed activity inside the buildings, but no external security measures. It was either incredibly sloppy operational security or a sign that something was wrong. Morrison was adjusting his position when he caught movement in his peripheral vision. Through his scope, he could see the tall grass in the valley moving differently than before. The movement was subtle but deliberate, as if something was moving through it rather than the wind causing natural sway. Contact, Morrison whispered into his radio. Possible movement in the grass, northwest of the compound, approximately 1,500 meters from our position. Chun immediately focused his thermal scope on the area Morrison had indicated. The heat signatures were faint, but definitely present. Multiple contacts, moving slowly through the vegetation in what appeared to be a coordinated pattern. The problem was that these heat signatures were different from the ones in the compound. They appeared smaller, and their movement patterns were unlike any military formation he had encountered. Rodriguez confirmed the sighting through his own scope. "I count at least 6 contacts moving through the vegetation. They appear to be heading toward the compound from the east." The tactical situation had just become significantly more complex. The original mission parameters called for monitoring and potentially engaging targets at the compound. Now there were additional unknown contacts that could be reinforcements, civilians, or an entirely separate group with unknown intentions. Chen made the decision to maintain observation while reporting the new development to command. The team's position remained concealed, and they had sufficient firepower to handle multiple threat scenarios. What concerned him most was the unusual movement patterns of the contacts in the grass. They weren't advancing in any recognizable military formation, and their thermal signatures suggested they might not be carrying standard weapons. As the sun rose higher, the thermal imaging became less effective, but visual observation improved. Morrison was the first to notice that the movement in the grass had stopped completely. Whatever had been moving through the vegetation had either reached their destination or gone to ground. Santos, who had been monitoring communications, reported that Base Command was requesting additional intelligence on the new contacts before authorizing any engagement. The mission parameters remained unchanged: gather intelligence and await further orders. The wait began to take its toll on the team's nerves. They had been in position for nearly 8 hours, and the unusual quiet of the valley was becoming increasingly unsettling. Normal enemy activity patterns involved regular movement, communication, and visible security measures. The compound below showed signs of occupation, but the occupants were exhibiting behavior that didn't match any known enemy profiles. By mid-afternoon, the team had documented extensive intelligence on the compound's occupants. Thermal imaging and visual observation confirmed the presence of multiple individuals, but their activities seemed more consistent with a civilian gathering than a military operation. There were no weapons visible, no defensive positions being established, and no signs of the sophisticated communication equipment that would be expected in a high-value target location. The anomaly was growing more pronounced. Intelligence reports had been adamant about the military significance of this location, but the observable evidence suggested something entirely different. Chen began to wonder if they had been given faulty intelligence or if this was an elaborate deception operation. Morrison was scanning the valley floor when he noticed fresh movement in the tall grass. This time, the contact was singular and moving in a direct line toward their position. The heat signature was human-sized but exhibited movement patterns unlike anything in his experience. The individual was moving through the grass with minimal disturbance, suggesting either exceptional training or intimate knowledge of the terrain. "Single contact moving toward our position from the valley floor," Morrison reported. "Range approximately 1,200 meters and closing." Chen immediately began calculating response options. Their position was well concealed and defensible, but a direct approach by an unknown contact represented a potential compromise of their mission. The individual could be a scout for a larger force, a civilian who had accidentally detected their presence, or something else entirely. The decision was made to maintain position while tracking the approaching contact. If the individual got too close to their location, they would have to consider more aggressive options. The mission's success depended on maintaining the element of surprise, and any compromise could jeopardize not only their current objectives but also future operations in the area. As the contact continued approaching, Rodriguez noticed something that made him question his own observations. The individual appeared to be moving through the grass without creating the typical disturbance patterns that would be expected. The vegetation barely moved as the contact passed through it, suggesting either supernatural stealth abilities or an intimate understanding of how to move through this specific terrain. Santos was monitoring radio frequencies when he detected brief transmissions in a language none of the team members recognized. The transmissions were short and infrequent, but they seemed to be originating from somewhere in the valley. The timing of the transmissions didn't correlate with any observed movement from the compound, suggesting the presence of additional unknown elements in the area. The complexity of the situation was increasing exponentially. What had begun as a straightforward surveillance and potential capture mission was evolving into something that challenged the team's understanding of the operational environment. Shin was beginning to suspect that the intelligence they had received was either completely wrong or deliberately misleading. By late afternoon, the approaching contact had closed to within 800 meters of their position. The individual's movement had slowed, but the direction remained consistent. Morrison could see that the contact appeared to be a single person, moving alone through the grass with remarkable stealth. What he couldn't determine was the individual's intentions or capabilities. The team's rules of engagement were clear. They could defend themselves against immediate threats, but any engagement had to be clearly justified. An approaching individual, even in a hostile environment, didn't automatically constitute a threat that warranted lethal force. However, the unusual circumstances of this contact's approach suggested that normal rules might not apply. Shin was preparing to request guidance from command when Morrison made an observation that changed everything. Through his high-powered scope, he could see that the approaching contact was not carrying any visible weapons. More significantly, the individual appeared to be a woman, moving through the grass with deliberate purpose but without any apparent hostile intent. The discovery that their approaching contact was an Una, the woman's approach, continued with an unsettling precision that defied everything the SEALs understood about movement in hostile territory. Rodriguez tracked her progress through his scope, noting that she seemed to know exactly where natural concealment existed in the grass. She moved from shadow to shadow, depression to depression, with the skill of someone who had traveled this route many times before. What disturbed Morrison most was the realization that if she continued on her current trajectory, she would pass within 50 meters of their concealed position. That level of proximity would make detection almost inevitable, regardless of their camouflage and concealment efforts. A civilian stumbling across a team of Navy SEALs would create complications that extended far beyond their current mission. Shin was weighing their options when Santos made another disturbing observation. The communications intercepts he had been monitoring showed a correlation between the woman's movement and brief radio transmissions from the compound. Every time she changed direction or paused for an extended period, there was a corresponding transmission from the buildings below. "Sir, I think she's in communication with the compound," Santos reported quietly. "The timing is too consistent to be coincidental." This revelation transformed their assessment of the situation entirely. If the woman was coordinating with the occupants of the compound, she couldn't be dismissed as an innocent civilian. However, the nature of her communication suggested a level of sophistication that didn't match intelligence assessments of enemy capabilities in this region. Chun made the decision to attempt limited contact rather than allow the situation to develop beyond their control. The team would maintain their concealed positions while he made initial contact with the approaching woman. The goal was to assess her intentions without compromising their mission or exposing their full presence. Rodriguez and Morrison adjusted their positions to provide overwatch while Chun moved to an intermediate position that would allow him to intercept the woman's approach. Santos remained at the primary observation point to maintain surveillance of the compound and monitor communications. As Chin moved into position, he realized that the woman's approach had slowed significantly. Through his scope, Morrison could see that she appeared to be scanning the rocky outcrop where the team was positioned. Her movements suggested awareness of their presence, despite their professional concealment efforts. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. If the woman had detected their presence, the element of surprise was already compromised. More concerning was the possibility that this detection was being communicated to other unknown elements in the area. Chun was positioning himself when the woman stopped completely, approximately 200 meters from the base of their observation point. She remained motionless in the tall grass for several minutes, and then began what appeared to be a deliberate signaling sequence. Morrison watched through his scope as the woman raised and lowered her hands in a pattern that seemed intentional rather than casual. The movements were repeated 3 times before she returned to her previous position in the grass. "She's signaling," Morrison reported. Deliberate hand movements, repeated pattern, definitely intentional communication. Santos immediately detected a response transmission from the compound, longer and more complex than the previous intercepts. The communication suggested that the woman's signals were being acknowledged and potentially responded to by the occupants below. The realization that they were observing a coordinated communication system changed the fundamental nature of their mission. This was not a chance encounter with a civilian. The woman was clearly part of whatever operation was taking place in this valley, and her role was significant enough to warrant sophisticated communication protocols. Chun abandoned his plan to make direct contact, and instead focused on gathering intelligence about the communication system they had discovered. The mission parameters would need to be reevaluated based on this new information, but first they needed to understand exactly what they were observing. The woman resumed her approach, but her movement pattern had changed. Instead of the previous stealthy advance, she was now moving with deliberate visibility. She was no longer trying to remain hidden. Instead, she seemed to be making her presence known to anyone who might be watching. This behavioral change confirmed Chin's assessment that their presence had been detected. The question now was whether the woman and her associates knew they were dealing with American military forces or simply suspected general surveillance. Rodriguez was tracking the woman's new approach when he noticed additional movement in the valley. Thermal scopes detected multiple contacts emerging from the compound and taking positions around the perimeter. Unlike the previous static occupation, these individuals were clearly responding to a specific threat assessment. Multiple contacts moving to defensive positions around the compound, Rodriguez reported. Count as 8, possibly 9 individuals. They appear to be establishing a perimeter. The tactical situation had shifted completely. What had begun as a surveillance operation targeting a static location had evolved into a potential confrontation with an organized group that was aware of their presence and responding accordingly. Santos continued monitoring communications while observing the defensive preparations below. The radio traffic had increased significantly, but the language remained unidentifiable. More concerning was the professional manner in which the defensive positions were being established. These were not amateur fighters or local militants. The coordination and tactical awareness suggested military training. Morrison was focusing on the approaching woman when she made a gesture that shocked him completely. She looked directly at their position and waved. Not a casual wave or an accidental gesture, but a deliberate acknowledgement of their presence. She just waved at us, Morrison reported, disbelief evident in his voice despite his professional training. Direct eye contact with our position and a deliberate wave. Chun realized that any pretense of concealment was now pointless. Their presence was not only known but apparently expected. The question was how to respond to a situation that had no parallel in their training or experience. The woman began approaching their position again, but this time she was walking upright through the grass instead of moving with stealth. Her approach was direct and non-threatening, but the implications were staggering. She was either incredibly brave or incredibly confident that she had nothing to fear from a team of armed SEALs. When she reached the base of their rocky outcrop, the woman stopped and called out in accented but clear English. "I would like to speak with your team leader. My name is Dr. Amira Hassan, and I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding." The use of perfect English and her identification as a doctor created a new set of complications that Chun had never encountered. The woman was clearly educated, spoke multiple languages, and was knowledgeable enough about military operations to identify their presence and request specific contact protocols. Chun made the decision to respond while maintaining defensive positions. He emerged from concealment with his weapon lowered but ready, approaching to within 20 meters of the woman's position. "Dr. Hassan, I am Lieutenant Commander Chun. Can you explain your presence in this area and the nature of the misunderstanding you mentioned?" The woman smiled, which was perhaps the most surreal aspect of the entire encounter. Here was an unknown individual who had appeared from nowhere in a hostile environment, detected a concealed SEAL team, and was now engaging in polite conversation as if they were meeting at a diplomatic reception. "Commander Chun, my colleagues, and I have been monitoring your surveillance of our research facility for the past 2 days. We were hoping to establish contact under controlled circumstances to prevent any unfortunate incidents." The revelation that they had been under observation for multiple days while believing themselves undetected was professionally humiliating and tactically dangerous. However, the identification of the compound as a research facility rather than a military installation suggested that their entire mission was based on faulty intelligence. "Dr. Hassan, Our information indicates this location is being used for hostile military activities. Can you provide evidence to support your claim about research activities? The woman reached into her jacket slowly, clearly aware that sudden movements could provoke a lethal response. She withdrew a tablet computer and activated the screen before holding it where Chun could see the display. The screen showed what appeared to be legitimate scientific documentation, including research permits from both the Afghan government and several international organizations. The documents identified the compound as a joint archaeological and geological research station studying ancient trade routes through the Hindu Kush Mountains. Commander, I believe your intelligence sources may have confused our legitimate research activities with hostile operations. We have been operating here under full governmental authorization for 18 months. Chin studied the documentation while maintaining his defensive posture. The permits and research authorizations appeared genuine, but operational security demanded verification through proper channels. However, the immediate tactical situation required a decision about how to proceed. Rodriguez was monitoring the defensive positions around the compound when he noticed that the armed individuals had lowered their weapons but maintained their positions. This suggested a de-escalation in response to the peaceful contact between Chun and Dr. Hassan. Morrison was studying the research documentation through his scope when he noticed additional details that supported the woman's claims. The compound showed evidence of scientific equipment rather than military installations, and the activities he had observed were more consistent with research operations than combat preparations. Santos reported that communications traffic had decreased significantly, and the remaining transmissions appeared to be coordination messages rather than tactical communications. The overall pattern suggested a research team responding to perceived surveillance rather than a military unit preparing for combat. Dr. Hassan continued her explanation while maintaining a respectful distance from Chun. We detected your surveillance equipment 2 days ago and have been trying to determine your intentions. Our security team is composed of former military personnel hired to protect valuable archaeological artifacts and research data. This explanation accounted for the professional defensive responses Chun had observed. Former military personnel would retain their tactical training while transitioning to civilian security roles. It also explained why their movement patterns and communication protocols had seemed sophisticated yet unfamiliar. The fundamental question remained whether Dr. Hassan's explanation was genuine or an elaborate deception. The documentation appeared authentic, but operational security required verification through intelligence channels before accepting any claims at face value. Chen was considering his options when Dr. Hassan made an unexpected offer. Commander, would you be willing to accompany me to our facility so that you can verify our research operations personally? I believe a brief inspection would resolve any concerns about our activities. The offer presented both an opportunity and a significant Rodriguez and Morrison descended toward the compound with Dr. Hassan, their weapons at ready position while maintaining a posture that suggested caution rather than hostility. The woman walked between them with remarkable composure, occasionally pointing out features of the terrain and explaining the geological significance of various rock formations. Chun maintained overwatch from the rocky outcrop with Santos, their scopes trained on the compound's perimeter where armed guards remained visible but non-threatening. The tactical radio crackled with periodic position reports, but the overall atmosphere had shifted from potential combat to cautious investigation. As they approached the main building, Morrison could see that the structure was indeed more consistent with a research facility than a military installation. Solar panels provided electrical power, and scientific equipment was visible through open windows. The defensive positions that had appeared threatening from a distance were revealed as simple observation posts designed to monitor the valley approaches. Dr. Hassan led them to the compound's main entrance, where she was greeted by a man in his 60s who introduced himself as Professor David Steinberg from the University of Chicago. His presence added credibility to the research claims, as his academic credentials could be easily verified through official channels. Gentlemen, welcome to our little operation, Professor Steinberg said with genuine warmth. I apologize for the confusion. We've been somewhat paranoid about security since several artifacts were stolen from a similar site last year. Rodriguez studied the compound's interior layout while maintaining tactical awareness. The buildings contained legitimate scientific equipment, research materials, and living quarters that were clearly occupied by civilians rather than combatants. The evidence supporting Dr. Hassan's claims was becoming overwhelming. Morrison was examining what appeared to be ancient pottery fragments when Dr. Hassan explained the significance of their discovery. We've uncovered evidence of previously unknown trade routes that connected Chinese and Middle Eastern civilizations over 2,000 years ago. The artifacts suggest cultural exchanges that historians never suspected. The archaeological significance of the site provided a compelling explanation for the sophisticated security measures. Valuable ancient artifacts would indeed require protection from theft, and the remote location would necessitate armed guards and advanced communication systems. Professor Steinberg led them to a laboratory area where research assistants were cataloging recent discoveries. The level of scientific activity was inconsistent with any military operation, and the international composition of the research team suggested legitimate academic collaboration. Dr. Hassan, how long has this research been ongoing? Rodriguez asked, still maintaining professional skepticism. 18 months for this specific site, but our team has been working in Afghanistan for nearly 4 years under a joint program between UNESCO and the Afghan Ministry of Cultural Affairs, she replied, producing additional documentation from a nearby file cabinet. The documentation included correspondence with various academic institutions, funding records from legitimate research organizations, and approval letters from Afghan government agencies. The paper trail was too extensive and detailed to be fabricated as part of a deception operation. Morrison was studying a map of the excavation sites when he noticed markings that explained the unusual thermal signatures they had observed. Dr. Hassan, what are these marked areas in the valley? Underground chambers and tunnel systems that we've discovered. Some date back over 1,500 years and were used for storage and protection of trade goods. We've been mapping the entire network. This explanation accounted for the irregular movement patterns they had detected in the valley. Research teams moving between excavation sites would naturally follow paths that avoided disturbing ongoing archaeological work. Professor Steinberg invited them to observe the primary excavation site, located approximately 200 meters from the main compound. The site showed clear evidence of professional archaeological methods, with carefully marked grid systems and proper preservation techniques. Rodriguez was photographing the excavation when he realized that the thermal signatures they had interpreted as potential enemy positions were actually archaeological teams working in underground chambers. The sophisticated equipment they had assumed was communication gear was actually ground-penetrating radar and other scientific instruments. Dr. Hassan noticed his understanding and smiled. Your surveillance detected our night shift teams working in the underground chambers. We work around the clock during the summer months to maximize our research time before winter weather makes excavation impossible. The revelation that their entire threat assessment had been based on misinterpreted scientific activity was professionally embarrassing, but strategically significant. It suggested serious problems with the intelligence gathering process that had led to this mission. Morrison was examining research photographs when he noticed images of artifacts that appeared to have military significance. Dr. Hassan, some of these artifacts appear to be weapons or military equipment. Ancient weapons, Petty Officer Morrison. We've uncovered evidence of medieval military activity in this valley, including what appears to be a significant battle site from the 13th century. The military artifacts are over 700 years old. Professor Steinberg explained that the site's historical military significance might have contributed to intelligence confusion. Modern intelligence systems sometimes have difficulty distinguishing between archaeological evidence of ancient military activity and current military operations. This explanation provided a plausible account for how legitimate research activities might have been misinterpreted as hostile operations. Satellite imagery of excavated weapons and defensive positions could easily be mistaken for evidence of contemporary military activity. As the inspection continued, Rodriguez found himself impressed by the thoroughness and legitimacy of the research operation. The team included archaeologists, historians, geologists, and cultural preservation specialists from multiple countries, all working under proper governmental authorization. Dr. Hassan introduced them to various team members, including the security personnel who had established the defensive positions that morning. The guards were indeed former military, hired through a legitimate security firm that specialized in protecting archaeological sites in unstable regions. The security requirements are unfortunately necessary, explained Captain James Bradley, a former British SAS operator who served as security chief. We've lost valuable artifacts to theft, and the remote location makes us vulnerable to bandits and opportunistic criminals. Bradley's credentials and the professional security arrangements provided final confirmation that the compound's defensive capabilities were legitimate protection measures rather than hostile military preparations. The sophisticated communication equipment was standard security protocol for remote research operations. Morrison was reviewing research data when Dr. Hassan showed him satellite communications logs that recorded regular contact with academic institutions worldwide. The communication patterns matched legitimate research protocols rather than military or intelligence operations. Dr. Hassan, why didn't you make contact with our forces when you first detected our surveillance? Rodriguez asked. We initially assumed you were criminals conducting reconnaissance for a potential theft operation. It wasn't until this morning that we realized you were American military personnel. Once we understood your identity, we wanted to establish peaceful contact to avoid any misunderstandings. This timeline explained the delayed contact and the cautious approach Dr. Hassan had used. A research team discovering military surveillance would naturally assume hostile intent until the nature of the surveillance could be determined. Professor Steinberg provided additional context about regional security concerns. We've had problems with artifact smugglers and criminal groups who target archaeological sites. Our initial assumption was that your team was conducting surveillance for illegal purposes. The mutual misunderstanding had created a situation where both sides had prepared for potential hostility while actually sharing common interests in regional security and stability. The research team wanted protection from criminals, while the SEAL team was targeting potential threats to regional security. As the inspection concluded, Rodriguez and Morrison had gathered sufficient evidence to confirm that the compound was indeed a legitimate research facility. The documentation, physical evidence, and personnel all supported Dr. Hassan's claims about archaeological research activities. Rodriguez radioed Chun with his assessment. Commander, this is definitely a legitimate research operation. All documentation checks out, and the physical evidence is consistent with archaeological work. No signs of hostile military activity. Chun received the report while maintaining surveillance of the valley. The confirmation that their target was a research facility rather than an enemy installation required immediate communication with base command and a complete reassessment of the intelligence that had led to this mission. Dr. Hassan accompanied Rodriguez and Morrison back to Chin's position, where she provided additional documentation for official verification. The research permits, government authorizations, and academic credentials could all be independently confirmed through appropriate channels. Commander Chun, I hope this inspection has resolved any concerns about our activities, Dr. Hassan said as they reached the observation point. We would be happy to provide any additional information needed to verify our legitimacy. Chun was studying the documentation when Santos reported interesting developments in the communications intercepts. Sir, I've been analyzing the radio traffic from earlier today. The language appears to be Dari mixed with technical archaeological terminology, nothing that suggests hostile intent. This linguistic analysis provided additional confirmation that the communications were related to research coordination rather than military operations. The use of technical terminology was consistent with academic work rather than combat planning. Morrison was reviewing his reconnaissance photographs when he realized that features he had interpreted as defensive positions were actually archaeological preservation measures. Covered areas that appeared to be fighting positions were actually protected excavation sites. Dr. Hassan, the covered positions around the compound that appeared to be defensive installations are actually archaeological protection measures? Rodriguez asked for final clarification. Exactly right. We cover sensitive excavation areas to protect them from weather and unauthorized access. The positioning might look tactical, but it's purely for archaeological preservation. The debriefing at Forward Operating Base Chapman took place in a secure conference room where Chun faced a panel of intelligence officers mission commanders, and regional specialists. The implications of the failed mission extended far beyond a simple reconnaissance error. It suggested systematic problems with intelligence gathering and analysis procedures. Colonel Patricia Williams, the base intelligence chief, opened the session by reviewing the original intelligence assessment. Lieutenant Commander Chun, our analysis indicated a 95% probability that the target compound housed enemy combatants planning regional attacks. Can you explain how that assessment proved to be completely incorrect? Chun presented his team's findings methodically, including photographs of the archaeological site, documentation provided by Dr. Hassan, and testimony from his team members about the legitimate research activities they had observed. The evidence was compelling and comprehensive. Major Robert Sullivan, the regional operations officer, studied the research permits Dr. Hassan had provided. These documents appear authentic, and we've confirmed the legitimacy of the UNESCO authorization through official channels. However, the question remains, how did our intelligence sources misidentify a research facility as a hostile installation? The investigation revealed disturbing gaps in the intelligence gathering process. The initial report had originated from a local informant who claimed to have observed foreign military personnel establishing a fortified position. The informant's description of armed guards and sophisticated communication equipment was technically accurate, but had been interpreted within a hostile context. Rodriguez provided testimony about the security arrangements he had observed at the research facility. The defensive measures were appropriate for protecting valuable archaeological artifacts in a remote location. The personnel were professional and well-trained, but their equipment and procedures were consistent with civilian security rather than military operations. Morrison's technical analysis of the compound revealed additional details that supported the research claims. The communication equipment was commercial-grade satellite systems designed for remote scientific operations. The power generation and infrastructure were optimized for laboratory equipment rather than military applications. Santos presented his linguistic analysis of intercepted communications. The radio traffic consisted primarily of research coordination and security protocols. Technical terminology related to archaeological preservation appeared frequently, with no indication of hostile planning or military operations. Colonel Williams reviewed the timeline of intelligence collection and analysis. The process had taken several weeks, during which multiple sources supposedly confirmed the presence of enemy activity. However, detailed examination revealed that most secondary sources were actually reporting the same initial information from the original informant. The intelligence assessment was based on a single primary source whose information was misinterpreted, Colonel Williams concluded. Subsequent reporting reinforced the initial assessment without providing independent verification of hostile intent. The investigation expanded to examine how Dr. Hassan and her team had detected the SEAL surveillance. Captain Bradley, the research facility's security chief, was interviewed via secure communication and provided detailed information about their counter-surveillance capabilities. We maintain passive observation systems around the research site as protection against theft and unauthorized access, Bradley explained. When we detected surveillance equipment positioned on the overlook, we initially assumed criminal reconnaissance. Our security protocols require assessment of potential threats before taking action. Dr. Hassan's decision to make direct contact rather than reporting the surveillance to authorities demonstrated remarkable judgment and courage. Her approach had prevented a potentially tragic misunderstanding while providing an opportunity to resolve the situation peacefully. Major Sullivan investigated the broader implications of the intelligence failure. If our assessment procedures can misidentify legitimate research as hostile activity, we need to examine other current intelligence assessments for similar errors. The review of regional intelligence files revealed concerning patterns. Several locations identified as potential threat sites showed characteristics similar to the misidentified research facility. Cross-referencing with legitimate research operations suggested that additional archaeological and scientific projects might have been mistakenly classified as hostile installations. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a regional cultural affairs specialist, provided context about the increasing number of legitimate research projects operating in Afghanistan. Archaeological research has increased significantly as security conditions improved in certain areas. Many of these operations employ professional security and use sophisticated equipment that might be misinterpreted by intelligence analysts unfamiliar with archaeological work. The investigation team consulted with academic institutions to develop better identification criteria for distinguishing between legitimate research operations and hostile military activities. The differences were often subtle, but could be recognized with proper training and awareness. Colonel Williams initiated a comprehensive review of intelligence analyst training programs. We need to ensure that our personnel can distinguish between legitimate civilian activities and actual threats. The archaeological research community represents a valuable resource for regional intelligence, but only if we can work with them cooperatively rather than treating them as potential enemies. Chen was asked to provide recommendations for improving surveillance and reconnaissance procedures. His suggestions included enhanced coordination with civilian authorities, better verification protocols for intelligence sources, and improved training in recognizing legitimate civilian activities in remote areas. The psychological impact of the mission failure was significant for the SEAL team. Professional warriors who prided themselves on tactical excellence had been completely wrong about their target. However, the peaceful resolution and valuable intelligence gained about actual conditions in the region provided important lessons for future operations. Rodriguez reflected on the experience during his individual debriefing. Dr. Hassan's courage in making direct contact prevented a potential disaster. Her willingness to trust us with the truth about their research activities demonstrated remarkable faith in our professionalism. Morrison's technical assessment highlighted the sophistication of modern archaeological research operations. The equipment and procedures used by legitimate research teams can appear very similar to military installations when observed through surveillance systems. Context and verification are essential for accurate assessment. Santos emphasized the importance of linguistic analysis in intelligence interpretation. Understanding the technical terminology and context of intercepted communications is crucial for determining whether activities are hostile or benign. Archaeological research involves complex coordination that can be misinterpreted as military planning. The investigation revealed that Dr. Hassan had attempted to contact American forces through official channels several weeks earlier. Her efforts to register the research facility with coalition forces had been lost in bureaucratic processing, contributing to the intelligence confusion. We had submitted all required notifications about our research activities, Dr. Hassan explained during a follow-up interview. When we detected surveillance, we assumed our paperwork had been processed and that you were aware of our legitimate presence in the area. The bureaucratic failure to process the research facility's registration had directly contributed to the intelligence misunderstanding. Improved coordination between military intelligence and civilian affairs offices could have prevented the entire incident. Colonel Williams implemented immediate changes to intelligence processing procedures. New protocols required cross-referencing potential threat assessments with registered civilian activities and cultural affairs databases before authorizing surveillance or engagement operations. Dr. Hassan's academic credentials were thoroughly verified, confirming her position as a respected archaeologist with extensive experience in Central Asian research. Her publications and professional reputation provided additional confirmation of the research facility's legitimacy. Professor Steinberg's background check revealed a distinguished academic career and previous experience working with military forces in protecting cultural sites during combat operations. His presence at the facility added credibility to the research mission and demonstrated proper civilian-military cooperation. The security arrangements at the research facility were reviewed and found to be appropriate for the threats faced by archaeological operations in remote areas. The professional qualifications of the security personnel exceeded standard requirements and demonstrated serious commitment to protecting valuable cultural artifacts. Captain Bradley's military background and security expertise had enabled the research team to establish proper defensive measures without creating genuine hostile capabilities. His experience allowed him to recognize military surveillance techniques and coordinate the peaceful contact that resolved the situation. The investigation concluded that the research facility represented exactly the type of civilian activity that coalition forces should support and protect. 6 months after the encounter at the archaeological site, Lieutenant Commander Chen found himself in a very different kind of briefing room. Instead of planning combat operations, he was participating in a joint military-civilian conference focused on improving cooperation between coalition forces and legitimate research operations throughout the region. Dr. Amira Hassan sat at the conference table as a respected advisor, her expertise now recognized as valuable to both military intelligence and cultural preservation efforts. The transformation from potential enemy to trusted partner represented a fundamental shift in how military forces approached civilian activities in operational areas. The new protocols developed from their encounter had been implemented across multiple theaters of operation. Intelligence analysts now received mandatory training in recognizing legitimate civilian activities, and coordination procedures required verification through cultural affairs offices before classifying any location as a potential threat. Colonel Williams presented statistics showing the impact of the improved procedures. Since implementing the Hassan protocols, we've identified 12 additional research facilities that had been misclassified as potential threats. We've also established productive relationships with scientific teams that are providing valuable intelligence about regional conditions. The archaeological research facility had become a model for military-civilian cooperation. The security arrangements negotiated between Captain Bradley and coalition forces provided protection for valuable cultural artifacts while offering strategic intelligence about movement patterns and activities in the remote valley. Rodriguez returned to the site several times as part of liaison duties, developing a genuine appreciation for the historical significance of Dr. Hassan's work. The ancient trade routes being uncovered provided insights into regional geography and cultural patterns that proved valuable for military planning. Dr. Hassan's team has mapped underground passages and historical travel routes that don't appear on any modern maps, Rodriguez reported. This information has been incredibly valuable for understanding how people move through this terrain. Morrison had developed expertise in distinguishing between scientific and military equipment after extensive training with archaeological research teams. His technical knowledge became a valuable resource for intelligence analysts throughout the region. The key is understanding the purpose behind the equipment, Morrison explained to a training class. Similar technology can be used for very different purposes, and context is crucial for accurate assessment. Santos had become fluent in the technical terminology used by archaeological researchers, enabling more accurate interpretation of intercepted communications. His linguistic skills had prevented several additional misunderstandings between military forces and civilian research teams. Dr. Hassan's influence extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Her scholarly work on ancient trade routes had provided historical context for understanding current smuggling patterns and criminal activities in the region. The same geographical features that facilitated trade 2,000 years ago are still being used by criminal networks today, Dr. Hassan explained during a strategic briefing. Understanding historical patterns helps predict current illegal activities. Professor Steinberg had established formal partnerships with military historians to study how ancient defensive strategies might inform modern security planning. The collaboration between academic research and military expertise was producing insights valuable to both communities. The underground chamber systems discovered by the archaeological team had been mapped and shared with coalition forces, providing crucial intelligence about potential hiding places and movement corridors used by hostile forces. Captain Bradley's security model had been adopted by other research facilities operating in unstable regions. The combination of professional protection with military coordination provided effective security without creating unnecessary tensions with local forces. The success of the cooperation between Dr. Hassan's team and coalition forces had attracted attention from international organizations responsible for cultural preservation. UNESCO had cited the arrangement as an example of how military forces could support rather than threaten archaeological research in conflict zones. Chen had been promoted and assigned to develop training programs based on the lessons learned from the encounter. His curriculum emphasized the importance of cultural awareness, civilian coordination, and verification procedures in intelligence assessment. The most important lesson is that our mission is to protect legitimate civilian activities, not to treat every unknown situation as a threat. Chin taught new intelligence analysts. Dr. Hassan's courage in making contact prevented a tragedy and taught us how to do our jobs better. The research facility had become a regional hub for archaeological work, with teams from multiple universities conducting research under the security umbrella established through military cooperation. The arrangement demonstrated how military resources could support rather than interfere with civilian scientific work. Dr. Hassan had received recognition from both academic and military communities for her role in developing improved cooperation protocols. Her expertise was sought by commanders throughout the region who needed to understand the difference between legitimate civilian activities and potential threats. The intelligence failure that had led to the original mission had been thoroughly analyzed and used to improve assessment procedures at the highest levels of military command. The case became required study material for intelligence officers throughout NATO forces. Major Sullivan had implemented regional coordination procedures that required consultation with cultural affairs specialists before authorizing surveillance of any civilian facility. The additional verification step had prevented multiple misunderstandings while improving the accuracy of threat assessments. The psychological impact on the SEAL team had been profound and positive. Instead of experiencing mission failure, they had learned valuable lessons about the complexity of modern operational environments and the importance of cultural awareness in military operations. Rodriguez had become an advocate for improved military-civilian cooperation, speaking at conferences about the value of building partnerships with legitimate civilian organizations. His testimony about the professionalism and courage displayed by Dr. Hassan had influenced policy development at senior levels. Morrison's technical expertise in distinguishing between civilian and military applications of similar equipment had been incorporated into intelligence analyst training programs worldwide. His detailed analysis of the archaeological facility's equipment had become a standard reference. Santos had developed specialized training programs for military linguists working in regions with significant archaeological or scientific research activities. His ability to recognize technical terminology had prevented several additional intelligence misinterpretations. The broader implications of the incident had influenced military doctrine regarding civilian protection and cooperation in complex operational environments. The recognition that legitimate civilian activities required military protection rather than suspicion had become established policy. Dr. Hassan's research had continued to provide valuable intelligence about regional historical patterns that informed current military planning. Her maps of ancient defensive positions had helped explain current insurgent strategy and tactics. The underground chamber systems had been secured through joint military-civilian efforts, preventing their use by hostile forces while preserving their archaeological value. The cooperation demonstrated how security and preservation goals could be achieved simultaneously. Captain Bradley had established training programs for civilian security personnel working in regions with military operations. His expertise in coordinating protection efforts with military forces had become a model for similar situations worldwide. The archaeological discoveries made by Dr. Hassan's team had attracted international attention and funding, contributing to Afghanistan's economic development while providing valuable cultural preservation. The military protection enabled the research to continue despite regional security challenges. Professor Steinberg had documented the cooperation procedures developed through the partnership with coalition forces, creating a handbook for academic researchers working in conflict zones. His work had influenced policy at multiple universities and research institutions. The success of the cooperation had led to expansion of the research facility, with additional teams studying different aspects of Central Asian history and culture. The military security umbrella had enabled broader scientific work that would have been impossible without protection. Chin reflected on how dramatically his understanding of military operations had changed through the encounter with Dr. Hassan. The recognition that civilian cooperation was often more valuable than civilian surveillance had influenced his approach to every subsequent mission. Dr. Hassan taught us that our most powerful weapon is often our willingness to listen and learn, Chin explained to a group of new officers. Her courage in trusting us with the truth about her work created opportunities for cooperation that made us all more effective. The lasting legacy of the woman who emerged from the tall grass was a fundamental transformation in how military forces approached civilian activities in operational areas. Her influence extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation to change doctrine, training, and procedures throughout the military. The research facility continued to operate successfully under the protection of coalition forces, producing valuable archaeological discoveries while demonstrating that military-civilian cooperation could achieve objectives that neither community could accomplish alone. Dr. Hassan's name had become synonymous with the courage required to build trust across cultural and professional boundaries. Her willingness to approach armed soldiers with nothing but documentation and honest explanation had prevented tragedy while creating opportunities for unprecedented cooperation. The protocols developed from their encounter continued to influence military operations years later, preventing misunderstandings while facilitating productive relationships between military forces and legitimate civilian organizations throughout the world. As Chun concluded his final briefing on the incident, he emphasized that the most important lesson was the recognition that apparent enemies could become valuable partners when approached with wisdom, courage, and respect for truth. Dr. Amira Hassan had demonstrated all of these qualities when she emerged from the tall grass to change everything they thought they knew about their mission, their enemy, and themselves. Dr. Hassan was invited to participate in intelligence analyst training programs as a subject matter expert on archaeological research operations. Her insights helped develop better recognition criteria for distinguishing between research activities and hostile installations. The research facility was officially registered with coalition forces and provided with communication protocols for reporting security concerns. The arrangement provided mutual benefits by improving security for the research team while providing intelligence about regional conditions. Chen's team received commendation for their professional handling of an unprecedented situation. Their restraint and tactical discipline had prevented a tragedy while gathering valuable intelligence about the true nature of regional activities. The broader implications of the investigation extended to intelligence operations throughout Afghanistan and other operational theaters. The recognition that legitimate civilian activities could be misinterpreted as threats led to improved assessment procedures and better coordination with local authorities. As the investigation concluded, it became clear that Dr. Hassan's emergence from the tall grass had exposed fundamental problems with intelligence gathering and analysis that extended far beyond a single reconnaissance mission. Her courage and wisdom had prevented a tragedy while providing an opportunity to improve military-civilian cooperation in ways that would benefit future operations throughout the region. The comprehensive explanation had resolved every tactical anomaly that had troubled the SEAL team during their surveillance. What had appeared to be sophisticated enemy defensive measures were actually standard archaeological protection protocols. Chun made the decision to conclude the reconnaissance mission and return to base for debriefing. The intelligence failure that had led to this mission would require investigation, but the immediate tactical situation was resolved. Dr. Hassan made a final request as the team prepared to withdraw. "Commander, would it be possible to establish communication protocols between our security team and your forces? We would prefer to avoid similar misunderstandings in the future." The request was reasonable and demonstrated continued commitment to peaceful cooperation. Establishing liaison procedures would prevent future intelligence misinterpretations while providing additional security for the research operation. As Chun considered the broader implications of the day's discoveries, he realized that the woman who had emerged from the tall grass had not only changed their understanding of this specific mission, but had also highlighted serious problems with intelligence gathering and assessment procedures. The lessons learned from this encounter would influence how similar situations were handled in the future. SK direct inspection would provide definitive intelligence about the compound's true purpose, but it would also expose the team to potential capture if Dr. Hassan's claims were false. However, the woman's behavior throughout the encounter suggested genuine confidence in her position. Someone involved in hostile operations would be unlikely to invite direct inspection by American military forces. The offer itself was evidence supporting her claims about legitimate research activities. Shen made the decision to accept partial inspection while maintaining tactical security. Two team members would accompany Dr. Hassan to the compound, while the others maintained overwatch positions with communication links to base command. Dr. Hassan, I will send 2 of my personnel to verify your research operations. However, I must emphasize that any deception or hostile action will result in immediate engagement by the remainder of my team. The woman nodded with apparent understanding of the security requirements. Commander, I appreciate your caution. I would expect nothing less from professional military personnel. Please be assured that your team members will be perfectly safe and will be able to verify everything I have told you. As preparations began for the inspection visit, Shin realized that this encounter would require a complete reassessment of their mission and potentially their understanding of intelligence operations in this region. The woman who had emerged from the tall grass had already changed everything they thought they knew about their target and their enemy. Ramed woman fundamentally altered the tactical situation. The team's training covered numerous scenarios involving civilian contacts, but those scenarios typically involve populated areas or known civilian zones. Encountering a lone, unarmed woman in a remote valley that was supposedly occupied by enemy combatants was unprecedented in their collective experience. Rodriguez was studying the woman's approach pattern when he realized that her movement seemed purposeful rather than accidental. She wasn't stumbling through the valley or appearing lost. Instead, she was moving with clear direction and apparent knowledge of the terrain. This suggested that she was either local to the area or had spent considerable time learning to navigate this specific landscape. The implications of her presence raised numerous questions about the intelligence that had led to this mission. If this valley was truly a hub of enemy activity, the presence of an apparently unarmed civilian woman suggested either a serious intelligence failure or a more complex situation than had been briefed. As the woman continued her approach, now within 600 meters of the team's position, Shin realized that they were rapidly approaching a decision point. They could remain concealed and hope that she passed by without detecting them, attempt to make contact and assess her intentions, or consider her a potential threat and take more aggressive action. The choice they made in the next few minutes would determine not only the outcome of their mission, but potentially the course of their entire understanding of what was happening in this remote corner of Afghanistan. The woman in the tall grass was about to change everything they thought they knew about their enemy, their mission, and the true nature of the conflict they had been sent to fight.